Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So I want to start this morning, first of all, by congratulating all of the challenge and the prototype winners for their giant strides into civic innovation with this most recent award. Our civic life really needs your enthusiasm and your creativity and your skill sets, and I'm just really tremendously heartened to see the dedication here this morning. So congratulations and good luck. And I also just want to recognize the Knight Foundation, the Democracy Fund, the Hewlett Foundation, the Rita Allen Foundation, and also the Annette Strauss Institute for Civic Life, which have been really stalwart supporters of the people and institutions who are trying to understand and improve democracy in America. So my mission this morning is to tell you about some research that I conducted that directly relates to your work, and in so doing, to complicate your lives a little bit. So if you didn't already pick up on this, now begins the first of many reminders that nobody said this was going to be easy. But not to worry, at the end of the day, Peter Levine is going to make you feel really glad about your decision to pursue this path, so you just have to kind of wait it out for a little while. And who wants to work on easy problems anyway? So with that warning, I'll get started. I think one of the reasons you've been selected as a winner is because you've really demonstrated a willingness to address adversity. And if there's one thing that our civic space has, it's adversity. So we are all here today because we all believe in some way that our civic life needs to be more inclusive for it to be more meaningful. As it turns out, I think that we can find some hope for the kind of at-scale change that we want to see in some unexpected quarters. I want to introduce you to this morning to a segment of the population that we've typically thought of as unreachable. Pollsters may ignore them, political campaigns may not view them as persuadable voters, but they're actually engaged in civic life in ways that make them a really important and promising component of the project of greater inclusion. So over the last year, myself and colleagues with the Google Civic Innovation Portfolio, John Webb, Chris Chapman, and Charlotte Krontiris, referred to this group of people as interested bystanders and dug as deep as we could to find out what motivates these everyday Americans to do things that are civic. And to find out, we conducted in-depth interviews with over 100 people in 6 cities across the country, and we fielded a digital survey to over 2,000 respondents, representative of the United States population 18 and older. So the findings that I'm going to share today are based on that body of evidence. So the first thing that you should know about interested bystanders is that there are a lot of them. According to our research, almost half the U.S. adult population could be considered interested bystanders. 48.9% of people are paying attention to issues around them, but not actively voicing their opinions or taking action on those issues. So to be clear, if you won the Night News Challenge, you're probably not an interested bystander. So don't go applying this to yourself. I know what you're thinking. But your mom might be, or your brother-in-law might be, or the lady that you see on the train every morning. These are people who, in a kind of Western democratic context, know what civic challenges exist and may want to complain or act to improve the situation, but haven't yet found the motivation or the drive to do something about it. Interested bystanders come from a broad variety of backgrounds, the majority of whom are probably technologically connected and may exhibit some sort of past participation in a variety of civic interactions. They're just not doing anything right now. And while the word civic may mean something to those of us in this room, we've come to learn that there's no shared understanding of this term among interested bystanders. In fact, the second thing that you should know about interested bystanders is that they have very complicated perspectives about civic life. I want to share 3 bystander paradoxes that I think are particularly relevant for understanding why it will be challenging to engage them effectively. So the first is that there's this kind of misalignment between the ways that interested bystanders think they should engage civically and the ways that they actually engage. Interested bystanders are not taking the political actions that they say they value, and on the flip side, they underrate what they're actually doing now as civic actors. So when asked to describe how civically engaged they are, interested bystanders say there's some version of middling. They're not completely disengaged, but they're not the most involved person on the block. And these comments, we think, surface a kind of mental model of civic engagement that's about a traditional, politically defined notion of participation, moving up this sort of civic ladder from sharing opinions to maybe voting, protesting, and organizing, and maybe eventually running for office. That's like the top. You win the game if you do that. And interested bystanders say that they're often sort of stalled on this ladder, doing things that, and not because they aren't acting on issues that matter to them, but because the ladder itself is fundamentally political. In fact, many people say they really prefer to stay away from political topics with friends and family, as they associate these discussions with conflict and contention. As a result, they often feel like what they're doing isn't good enough or it doesn't count. This leaves them feeling sort of demotivated and embarrassed, actually. So in a way, interested bystanders seem to have a kind of low civic self-esteem. While they value these higher ladder actions, they're actually doing these lower ladder ones. So while interested bystanders associate, as I mentioned, the political aspects of civic life with conflict and shame and negative experiences, they are attracted to the aspects that are about community involvement and social relationships. So when offered an opportunity to define something that they would consider civic, as this infographic displays, interested bystanders talk about volunteering and also donating and raising money as things that they mention most frequently. They say that these actions are about being involved in the community, and they describe being motivated to participate by a sense of personal fulfillment and purpose. They mention much less frequently actions that are about the traditional civic ladder, as you can see here on the left, with the exception of petitions, which we'll discuss shortly. You'll see voting in its place here on the civic ladder. And one thing I want you to take away from this visual is how embedded this action is in a sea of other possibilities, basically, for interested bystanders. So remember, we're sort of viewing civic life here from the lens of the interested bystander. So just to give you an example of somebody that we spoke with, we met an older gentleman in Phoenix who'd had a pretty difficult life and considered himself to be in a period of redemption and healing after many years of strife. He had a pretty hard exterior, but perhaps because of his age, he was able to feel empathy for older women in the complex where he lives. This is a picture of where he lives, who didn't really have anybody to look out for them. He had heard about scammers coming to the door in this community and decided that he would do a nightly security walk around the perimeter of the area just to make sure that everything was in order. So he does this every night at 11 p.m. He walks around the perimeter of his area, and he can tell you who's sitting at the bus stop late at night and what the condition of the properties are in the area where he lives. He doesn't ask anybody's permission to do this, nor does he seek recognition for it. It's just a part of how he views his role in the community. And importantly, this is a gentleman who can't vote because he lost that ability through having a criminal record. So this is just one example from our research that suggests that a community and socially defined notion of civic life is actually more meaningful and salient for interested bystanders than a politically defined notion. While they venerate this sort of civic ladder, they actually participate more in civic life. So the second paradox is that while interested bystanders say that power comes from having a voice, they are very disinclined to share their own opinions. One way of acting on opinion is signing a petition, and in fact, this was the most commonly cited civic action among our participants. However, when we asked people if they could recall the topic of the last petition that they signed, they could not. So they seem to record the memory of the action, but not a memory of the issue. And even though they say that they sign petitions fairly frequently, they tell us that they don't actually value the action very much. And yet this is what they're doing to advocate for issues that they care about. More broadly, interested bystanders told us that they are not interested in sharing or receiving opinions. One man told us, "I've lost some friendships over my views. You have your opinions and I'll have mine, but I won't voice them unless it's absolutely necessary." Another gentleman told us, "You might as well be a bum asking for a quarter," to tell us how much he enjoyed listening to other people's opinions. Basically, nobody wants to be that person on Facebook. That's a direct quote. So debate is really the bedrock of our democracy, but across the board, we talked with people who were unwilling to enter into that debate unless they had very deep knowledge or didn't mind a backlash, real or perceived. Most interested bystanders seem to view politics as a source of conflict, and they want to avoid experiencing that contention with their friends or coworkers, either in person or online. And the third paradox, while many interested bystanders believe they have the most power at the local level, most participants report voting only at the national level. So one gentleman told us, if you vote in local elections, this is a direct quote, if you vote in local elections, you have more clout. Less people vote. The ones with the most importance get the least attendance. But local ones, I generally don't vote. I only do midterms or presidentials. So an awareness of how important local elections are and a choice not to vote in them. When we inquired about why they voted, participants indicated that while they lack a clear sense of the efficacy of their vote, they continue to vote out of hope or routine or a sense of civic piety. One woman in Boston told us, "Does my vote really count? I don't know, but I feel like I should do my part." So although they say they have more relative power in society at a local level than at a national level, most were voting in national and not local elections, indicating a tension between their voting choices and their own sense of efficacy. So given this landscape of fascinating paradoxes and how almost half the United States population views civic participation and power and engagement, a final finding actually seems pretty rational, I think. And this is where we turn to the topic of self-interest. So what we found is that when they do take civic action, interested bystanders do things that meet the public interest, most often when it aligns with their self-interest. So remember that interested bystanders are importantly people who, the majority of the population actually, almost, the people are generally not very active in civic life. So when they do step into the civic arena, they tell us that it's likely for one of three reasons. First, they have prior personal or professional experience or expertise that they feel they can bring to bear to an opportunity. The second is that they have interests that they feel are at stake and they want to take action to protect those interests. And the third thing is that they want the satisfaction of an emotionally meaningful experience. This is important. So interested bystanders are telling us that they don't act out of a sense of altruism, absent some direct benefit to themselves. Should we be surprised? These are people with very busy lives who lack a clear understanding of what they could actually do to impact an issue of concern, and unconvinced that what they could do would really make that much of a difference anyway, all of which I think are fairly high barriers to action. I don't think that we should be surprised to see them act only when the opportunity presented will meet some direct self-interest. This is rational behavior. Okay, so what do we do with the fact that almost half the United States needs to perceive a direct benefit to themselves in order to do something of public benefit? I want to share a few of my thoughts with this, and I'll ask for you to kind of consider which pieces of advice really seem most relevant to your projects and your interests and your talents. Just setting the context, over the next year and a half, our civic life is going to contract, okay, to focus very narrowly on the 2016 elections. And this is part of the cycle of American civic life, and you all are very squarely in it. And because of that, I want to invite you to consider a few implications of this research as you plunge forward and trying to sort of perfect our American democracy. So I think the first implication is that you don't have to design for activists, the persuadable voters, or the apathetic, the totally disengaged. You can design for interested bystanders and still reach a huge market and have a huge impact. So you may want to consider thinking about how to reset your strategies through the lens of somebody who is an interested bystander. Perhaps that means new features to help your users connect their professional skills to community needs. Maybe that means doing better discovery to understand what interests at stake they're really willing to fight for. And maybe that means revisioning the role of emotional meaning and purpose in your interactions with them. The second implication is that we should be designing civic interventions that flow from everyday Americans' real motivations and not our aspirations for them. So we shouldn't continue to make products, design policies, and promote programs that assume some sort of a priori willingness to spend precious time or resources engaged in civic activities that don't have a clear personal benefit for the intended participants. I think there are many ways of connecting public needs with personal gains, and we should be more creative about making those links. And relatedly, I think we should be thinking about how do we help people do the kinds of things that they value, building from a sense of personal efficacy. How can we help people recognize and mine the power they're already exercising? I think this means an honest reckoning with the role of human self-interest. And finally, you're not going to like this slide. Voting is important, but I think that we can consider and explore in much greater depth the civic fulfillment that comes from community and social activities. So elections remain an incredibly important lever of power for the average person, especially at the local level. I love voting. I love getting the sticker that says I voted. I think it's really important. However, interested bystanders who report voting say they do so out of a sense of civic duty and obligation, but not because they have a clear sense of the efficacy or what impact it has. So if the election season is the only time that we're trying to engage interested bystanders, then they will never feel engaged, precisely for these reasons. However, I do think that the electoral processes that feel so hollow to them now could be filled with more meaning if there were a more direct connection to the community and social activities that give them purpose and satisfaction the other 11 months of the year. And this is exciting because this is an area where technology can really make a difference. Technology helps us understand what people's patterns and attitudes and interests are, and we can use that information to connect with civic interests. So we did this research because we saw a need in our community, the sort of broader civic innovation community that we had the ability to address, and we're really pleased to be able to share the full findings with you online at googlepolitics.blogspot.com. Guess who still uses Blogspot? Google. And we have a deck of findings that should be pretty easy for you to sort of sift through. We also have the full report, a full white paper if you're more interested in airplane reading. So we look forward to hearing what the implications might be for the work that you're doing. We know it's going to take an even broader coalition than the people in this room to realize the kind of inclusive and just and participatory society that we all desire, and we're happy to be able to contribute knowledge and information to that endeavor. And to close, I'd just like to recognize my co-researchers, and there are a number of folks actually in this audience who helped us to shape and define and conduct and share the research. I remain, as I said, extremely hopeful about the possibility of a more inclusive civic life, and I'll close this morning with thanks for your kind attention, and I hope that you heard something here today that helps you along your own path. Thank you.